This may be my most wonderful responsibility in this first meeting that I have attended as your director. As you undoubtedly know, the ALI does not always confer its Distinguished Service Award at every annual meeting. It's nothing routine. It happens once in a while when there is someone who comes along who has just gone beyond anything that one could expect. But this year, we knew that we had such a person who literally defines the award in her every action, her contributions to her state, her contributions to her locality, her country, the world, and of course, oh yes, her contributions to the American Law Institute. You all know that I'm talking about our beloved friend, Roberta Cooper Ramo. There is so much that I could say, I hardly know where to begin. Roberta comes from that generation of women who startled the world by their interest in becoming a lawyer. Many of us have stories, people saying, "You're doing what?" But of course, that just gives an incentive to a person like Roberta. It's kind of a way of encouraging things. And actually, as I was preparing these remarks, I took the opportunity to ask her husband, Barry, what he might say if he were in my position.
Oh, dear.
and Barry first kind of looked at me and he said, well, I mean, I would say that Roberta is a person who deeply believes in fairness and that value has animated virtually everything that she's done. And I thought this was a great answer. But then Barry later on amplified on the answer. And so I will liberally borrow from some of the things that Barry called to my attention, some of which I knew and some I didn't. He did point out that they really came together in a way at the University of Chicago. And the University of Chicago Law School for Roberta and me has always been a common feature. But Barry, of course, long before I knew Roberta, was about to start a medical internship at the University of Chicago, and so Roberta decided, I'm going to go to the law school, and the law school admitted her as one of 6 women in her law school class. You would stand out from the crowd in a situation like that, and it doesn't seem to have fazed Roberta at all, as far as I can tell. You know, she was there, everybody else was there, or at least it didn't in any detectable way. She navigated her way with distinction through the law school, and it really probably just polished her legal skills to be there, knowing that you had to speak up. You know, all those men in the room were sitting there thinking that they were, the custodians of all wisdom, but actually they needed to just listen to Roberta. So unfortunately, as is the case with so many distinguished women we've heard about. Think of Sandra Day O'Connor's story, for example. Right away after graduation, jobs were not falling into Roberta's lap. Roberta herself has told the story of going to a law firm in the Durham, North Carolina area where she and Barry had moved, and tells the story of no one wanting to interview her except one firm that overlooked the fact that there was an A at the end of her first name, and that she was Roberta, not Robert. And of course, that seemed, in their view, to be disqualifying. But she did persevere. She taught at Shaw University in Raleigh. They moved again. She later did manage to get work in San Antonio, but to jump across some things, eventually she returns to her beloved New Mexico. And certainly if you spend any time around Roberta, you know that she is devoted to the state of New Mexico, has done everything from advise governors there to participate in the Santa Fe Opera, to look at other cultural institutions, and just to enjoy that beautiful and culturally rich state. So she does everything back in New Mexico, ranging from a demanding law practice, back to Barry's point about fairness, an extensive pro bono practice, an innovator in the practice of law, which brought her to the attention of the American Bar Association, more about that, and so much more. And I like to think that this was one of our linking factors. Roberta does all of this while at the same time she's raising 2 children. And I know that sometimes it's actually harder to be the first mother than it is to be the first woman. Because, you know, news bulletin to all of you, being someone's mother isn't quite the same thing as being someone's father. Never mind our reporters on children in the law. At least in those days, a lot of things, a lot of responsibilities fell on the shoulders of mothers. And not everybody was like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, when called by her school, asked them quite pointedly, why didn't they call Marty when the children were having, you know, the kinds of things that schools call you about. But anyway, Roberta and I first crossed paths, as I was saying, through the University of Chicago Law School. I think it was back in the 1980s when you were coming to the law school for various, you know, visiting committee functions, other things. I was teaching full-time at the law school, and our mutual commitment to the school, our mutual background in trying to manage professional careers and children and all the rest cemented our friendship. And over the years, Roberta has, again, just done so much. So today, as I said, she is you know, a partner in her firm. She used to make jokes when she was president of the American Law Institute about the firm wondering where she was, but she was, of course, here with the ALI. But before that, she was the first woman to be the president of the American Bar Association. That was, you know, and firsts just kind of attached themselves to Roberta. She was the first woman to serve as our president here at the American Law Institute. She held that position until 2017, when she became chair of the council. And Roberta continues every day to contribute. I know, I get a phone call and I see it's Roberta. You know, I can tell the number comes up on
505.
Right, it's a 505 number. I don't know that many people in 505. So, so it'll be an issue about the Institute. She's always thinking about the best interest of the Institute. How can we preserve this incredible practice that we have of bringing together everyone? What does the word everyone mean? This was one of the things that Roberta really focused on as president. We are not the East Coast plus West Coast and maybe a few Chicago and Dallas and Houston people institute. We're the American Law Institute. And so under Roberta's leadership, we found ways to reach out to every state, to reach out to every group of people in every state. And when we have, you know, I'm not saying the work is done yet, there's always more to do, but there was a tremendous improvement in finding the best people all over the country. They've been there all along. It wasn't their fault that we weren't finding them. So we are finding many, many more of them at this point. And Roberta brought that same inclusive, really imaginative look to the projects that we did during her time, and the one that I just have to single out is the American Indians Project. This is such an important piece of work. I think it was Roberta's perspective from living in New Mexico all that time, working with various groups, but it began with just a meeting of people interested in the area to see whether this was even possible, with Matthew Fletcher, who later became our reporter, our lead reporter, leading that meeting. But one step followed another, followed another. I refer to it actually all the time. I think it's such an interesting area, and those of you who are looking at the Supreme Court know that they are giving close attention to this field now too. And it was all because of Roberta that this restatement was even done. So Roberta has been a backbone of the ALI since the day she joined. She continues to be, as I said. She's left her mark on it, and we are infinitely better because of her service. So it is my great pleasure and honor to give her the Distinguished Service Award.
I don't feel comfortable accepting this award for myself. I want to say that I am accepting it because of your distinguished service. It's the luckiest of breaks that I got to be a lawyer, the luckiest of breaks, and I think my singular honor when I was told that I was going to be a member of the American Law Institute. Now, to put it in perspective, you should know that my darling, supportive husband, who kind of thought I was getting this award because you thought I was 100. When I was in law school, he would occasionally wander across the Midway, where he was an intern, and he came one day to sit in the back of my civil procedure class. The teacher was Jeffrey Hazard. Tragically, he called on me, and my husband saw that I did not distinguish myself. And when I became a member of the American Law Institute and I called him, his immediate response was, "Does Jeff Hazard know about this?" And so the answer was shockingly yes, and he had agreed. Let me take a few minutes to say thank you, and then, if you'll indulge me, to talk about the next 100 years of the American Law Institute. None of us is here alone, and our families, in my case, my wonderful feminist husband, and my law firm, which for 40 years now has given up my time and any money that might come into our coffers, because they believe that a lawyer's duty and a law firm's duty is to support the democracy. Keep that in mind for a second. I want to also say, as those of us who've been in leadership, but all of you probably know, that in large part, the work of the American Law Institute is created because of the distinguished directors that we've had. And we now have wonderful Judge Wood, and we have sitting here, and I'm deeply grateful, Ricky Revesz, without whom I don't think I would have accomplished anything. So thank you to Ricky. Stephanie Middleton, who could not be here today, succeeded by Eleanor, and the entire staff of the ALI that you've heard mentioned many times. It's a small group, but they are equally devoted to the goals of the ALI and to the quality that the ALI stands for in everything that they do. When I thought about this 100th meeting, and we started thinking about it years ago, I was thinking about what was happening in 1923. And I thought, well, in 1923, they must have been very optimistic. It was between the two world wars. The crash obviously had not happened. Drinking was coming back. I mean, things were good. And they recognized, as we heard earlier today, that there was a big transformation in the country. We were becoming a whole nation unified, not just by the railroad, but by telephones and highways, and that we had to have a legal system that encompassed an entire country in a different kind of way than we had before. I was a little surprised when I went to actually do the research, as all of us who do legal research often are, to read something, and this is the report of the Committee on the Establishment of the Permanent Organization for the Improvement of the Law, proposing the establishment of the American Law Institute. Now, if that were a black letter, 4 of you would stand up and find better ways to say that, but that's what it was called. And here is the language of the introduction that I want to read to you. This is from 1923, the first meeting. There is today general dissatisfaction with the administration of justice. That feeling of dissatisfaction is not confined to that radical section of the community which would overthrow existing social, economic, and political institutions. If it were, we as lawyers could afford to ignore it. So think about that. 100 years later, we are in a different way, I think, many of us concerned, not just about the quality of justice, but whether the democracy will survive. I have always believed that American lawyers were both the architecture and the foot soldiers of the American democracy. And the American Law Institute now is more deeply important than ever, not just because of the quality of the work that we do, but because of the way that we do it. In a society which, for the moment, in part propelled by social media, in part propelled by ignorance, and the fact that we don't have good civics education, has become deeply polarized and unable to talk to one another. And so the American Law Institute, its culture is, in my view, as important as its work. And I think in order for us to survive the next 100 years, I have to call on each member to be aware of the importance of the culture. We are one of the few institutions in America today where people can talk about deeply important matters, have disagreements, and understand that to come together is the only way to move forward. Protecting that culture will not be easy in this time of social media. But I ask each of you, as part of your distinguished service to the American Law Institute, not just to carry on, as I know you will, inside the ALI, but as each of you, judges, lawyers, legal scholars, step outside this room and outside our meetings and outside our work, I call upon each of you to take this value, this culture, this need for us to talk to one another and come together to move forward as the kind of marching orders that I think our founders would have required. Diane talked about my love of New Mexico. And I do love New Mexico. I love New Mexico, and let me say I'm grateful to all of my fellow New Mexicans who came here today, some of them just for this moment, who have not just been supportive of me personally, but have understood how important we all are to the American Law Institute because we live in a different world. I live in a place where my waiting room is as likely to be filled with people from 3 pueblos and cowboys with cowboy hats and people from the technology world all in the same room. So what's important about New Mexico for all of us is that there is something about the light there that clarifies that the differences are exquisite. And it's not just the differences when you can see the sun come down and hit a particular pinon tree or watch the mountains turn different colors right in front of your eyes, where people pull over actually to see the sunset. It's that it unites us in the understanding that none of us individually will be nearly as great as what nature has provided, and that all of us individually are required to take care of one another. And that's what's so important about New Mexico. What's important about the American Law Institute is that we have undertaken as our mission the need to make sure that the justice system and the law actually works in the fairest, clearest way. And for that, I accept this honor on your behalf. Once I was able to hear Martin Luther King in a crowded kitchen on the south side of Chicago. And he had a constitution in his hand. And he was explaining to people who had been abused in every way by the city of Chicago at the time why lawyers and courts and the Constitution were on their side. Everybody often hears the wonderful quote in his wonderful voice that says that the moral arc, the arc of the universe is long, but it goes toward morality. In my view, it doesn't go to morality by itself. It requires scholars and justice and lawyers and places like the American Law Institute to make sure that this dissatisfaction with the administration of justice is something in our past and not our future. So I accept this Distinguished Service Award, not for myself, but for each of you that gives your time, your energy, your wisdom, and your willingness to make sure that the arc of justice is in the right direction. I thank you.